Let's continue with our study of piecewise functions by doing some more graphs. So I'm going to look at this piecewise function here. F of x equals minus x plus 2 if x is greater than or equal to 0, and x plus 4 if x is less than 0. So what I like to do is write down both equations, and remember that f of x is the same thing as y. And I make a t-table for each of those equations. Now we know that both of these equations are linear equations, therefore we just need 2 points. Now the first point that we put on each table is the number that we see restricting the restrictions on x. So since I see a 0, I'm going to put a 0 here and a 0 here. Now on the first one, we want x is greater than or equal to 0. So besides 0, choose another point. I'll just choose the point 1. Okay, let's go ahead and graph this first, and then we'll move on to the next one. Put a 0 in for x, and what do you get? Put a 0 in for x, and you get y equals 2. Put a 1 in for x, and you have negative 1 plus 2 is 1. So we're going to graph the point 0, 2 and the point 1, 1. And when you're drawing your portion of your piecewise function, you're going to start with the first point that you have in your table and draw an arrow through the second point. So here's the first half of our graph. Now, I don't know why I put a 0 there. The 0 should be right here. Okay, now the next equation, x plus 4, if x is less than 0. Remember I said we still have to use the 0, but we need to use one more number. What's a number less than 0? You can choose any number you want. I'll choose a negative 1. Now let's plug those values in. 0 plus 4 is 4, and negative 1 plus 4 is 3. Now the only thing you have to watch for is when we have a less than or a greater than without the line below it. At that number we have to have an open circle. So at 0, 4, I'm going to put an open circle. And then I'm going to plot negative 1, 3. And I'm going to go from the 0, 4 through the negative 1, 3 to draw my second portion of the graph. And you always have to have an open circle above a closed circle so that that passes the vertical line test. Let's try another one. This says f of x equals negative 2x if x is greater than or equal to 0, and it equals 2x if x is less than 0. So I have y equals negative 2x, and that's when x is greater than or equal to 0. And I have y equals 2x, and that's when x is less than 0. So I'll make my t-tables. And in both t-tables, what number am I going to use? I'm going to use this number right here. Okay. Now this is very similar to the last one. X is greater than or equal to 0 and x is less than 0. So I'm going to go ahead and choose a 1 for my x right here. And I'll choose a negative 1 for my x right here, because negative 1 is less than 0. And 1 is greater than 0. Now let's plug in those values to figure out y. Y equals negative 2 times 0 is 0. Y equals negative 2 times 1 is negative 2. Go over here and fill in our table. Y equals 2 times 0, which is 0. y equals 2 times negative 1, which is negative 2. Okay, so I'll start with this first one. I'm going to plot 0, 0, and 1, negative 2. Then draw your line going from your 0, 0 through your 1, negative 2, placing an arrow. Now this next one says 0, 0. We already have a point 0, 0 plotted, so we don't have to worry about that point any longer. We're just going to plot the point negative 1, negative 2. And I'm going to draw an arrow from the 0, 0 through the negative 1, negative 2. Now because these points were the same, we don't have to worry about an open circle and a closed circle. This one makes it closed, and therefore this one is taken into consideration when you talk about the second point.